Okay, so today, now, we're going to move on now to quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. We're going to need to use this for the rest of the school year, so I thought I'd go ahead and do all of it at once. And so if you look for any information, more information on this, this is in the section of the book on pages 526 to 538. So, first off, taking notes. All right, use a computer file or note cards or a notebook. You want to keep track of the research that you're doing. Now, one of our next lessons, not the very next, but in a couple of lessons, I'm going to go over how to do digital research cards to help you keep track of all your notes on your research. Okay. Take notes in your own words and use your own sentence patterns. This is when you're paraphrasing. We're going to do both. I'm going to show you guys how to do the notes in using direct quotes and also paraphrasing. If you find wording that you like when you're paraphrasing and you'd like to quote it, be sure to use quotation marks. So even if it's a section of the sentence or a particular word that you just feel like there's no better word for it, put it in quotation marks. And I'll show you this later in my paraphrasing example. Label each note with a number to identify the source and subject heading. Again, so these are mostly what we use when we used to use just regular note cards. I would have like a note card labeled number 1 with all the information on it with the source information and MLA formatting, and then every note or quote that I got from number 1, I would have a little 1 in the corner to help keep track of everything and where it came from. Problem with regular note cards is that you lose them, especially. So I try to keep everything as digital as possible nowadays, especially, of course, I do a lot of things on the cloud as well to make sure they don't disappear, but it's up to you. But I will ask you to do the digital note cards for our assignments in this class, and you're welcome to use them in other classes later on. All right, so you need to decide, am I going to quote, directly quote, word for word? Am I going to paraphrase and put in my own words? Or am I going to summarize, which is going to be like a larger chunk, which we do for our summary response papers. Okay, so quote text when the wording is worth repeating or makes a point, so no rewarding will do it justice. Sometimes, if I'm talking about Shakespeare, Shakespeare's words are so well done that I want to say it word for word, because if I try to put it in my simple words, unlike Shakespeare's writing, then I would lose something in it. So if I want people to see, that the wording is wonderful, then I'm going to do a direct quote. So paraphrase sources that are not worth quoting but contain details you need to include. So this is especially important as we move on, especially when we get to our argumentative paper. I'm going to insist on paraphrasing sources unless it's really important. But other than that, I want you want to do this like where there's just no reason to put that whole sentence where all I need is this information and I can just put it in my own words and not take up a bunch of room. Okay, summarize longer passages whose main points are important but whose details are not. So if I want to say I'm going to use this whole article as a resource for the point I'm making in this paragraph, then I'm going to just summarize it and give you just the main points, and then use those main points to, as evidence for my point that I'm making. And so that's going to be more of a summary. All right, so quoting, if you're looking again for more information, look on 528 to 531. So quoting is reproducing the source exactly, word for word. You don't change anything. You'll see this when, everywhere. We see this all over the place, especially if you're watching, like you're reading the newspaper. If they're quoting someone and it's in quotation marks, then you assume that's word for word. If they don't, then you figure, oh, that must be in the writer's words, but they're just summarizing or paraphrasing what the other person said. Okay? It can be modified. So you're gonna, you can omit some things using ellipses. So for example, I don't need this whole sentence. I just need this part. Like they have a big chunk in the middle where they go off and talk about something else that's not important. I want to cut that chunk out, and so I'll use ellipses or 3 little dots. if I need to change one word or to add a word into the sentence, I'm going to use brackets. So for example, if in the essay that I'm quoting, they say he, but it's not clear who he is when I take the quote out of the paragraph, then I'm going to take that quote, get rid of the word he, and in brackets put the person they're referring to, the antecedent that that pronoun refers to. So there won't be any confusion. And so you can do that as well. Or if you need to add a word, say for example, there's a typo. Of course, there's other things too if you find a typo. Set off longer quotes by indenting it using block style. You'll see this style, it's in your textbook. We don't use it too often. I used it, the only time I've ever really used it is when talking about literary works, and I just had to use this big chunk of direct quote from somewhere else, and there's a whole way of doing that. I usually haven't used it very much. It's just I have to talk about this whole paragraph. Typically, if your direct quote is, I always say like over 4 or 5 lines, you're going to use a block quote because you don't want it taking up so much room. So here's a direct quote example. So here's an original text. All right, you'll notice in the original text, you have no idea where it came from. You have no idea if it's my words or direct quote. I mean, you just know that, it's a direct quote because I'm telling you, but I've just copied and pasted this out of an essay. Well, right now, this would be plagiarism if I just plopped it as is right now into my paper. One, I'm taking someone else's words. I'm not using quotation marks to show that they are someone else's words, and I don't have any kind of in-text citation or introductory phrase to acknowledge the source as well. Okay, so this is going to be my direct quote, how I would quote it if I were putting it into my paragraph in evidence. So I start with my introductory phrase in the article, Spastic in Time, Time and Disability in Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5. The author states that, okay, so right here, I'm giving an introduction, I'm telling you where it came from, and I'm saying author. Because down here, I say the author's name, I introduce who the author is. And so then I have, these are the same words from here to here. These are the same words that are over here. I've put them in quotation marks, showing that they're not my words. Now notice, for my in-text citation, I got rid of the period here after 5, because that's where it was originally. I put the quotation mark, and then I put my in-text citation, then the period, okay? It's just one of those little things, but it will drive some professors crazy, and it drives me crazy sometimes. So after the direct quote, it's going to be last word is a quote, quotation mark, in-text citation, then period. There's no reason to have 2 periods, 2 period here and a period here. Okay, so you just want the 1 period for the direct quote, and it's going to be after the in-text citation. All right, paraphrasing. Again, these are 531 and 534. So guidelines for paraphrasing. This is where we can get tricky. Use your own words and sentence structure. So this, by sentence structure, like use the way you talk. You're not going to sound the same necessarily as, an academic professor or an expert on it. Now, you may have your own, but it shouldn't be like sentence for sentence. What some people think they're paraphrasing if they find a synonym for every word in the sentence, that is still plagiarism. You're not actually paraphrasing. It's not your sentence structure, and it's not your words. I mean, it may be your words, but it's not your sentence structure. So it has to be both. Introduce paraphrase text with a signal phrase, and we're going to talk more about signal phrases, but you'll see my example in here. All right, put in quotation marks any of the source's original phrasing that you use. So even if it's like if it's a specific word, I'm going to put it in quotation marks, and then if it's like a few words together that I'm like, I don't think I can do that justice, I'm going to put it in quotation marks as well. And you'll see that again when I get to my example. Indicate the source to avoid plagiarism. So there's 2 ways I'm going to do this. I'm either going to do it in my my introductory phrase, so I'm going to say like, give the author's name and where and what article, or I'm going to make sure I have the in-text citation so I can indicate the source. All right. So even putting it in my own words, I still have a in-text citation. So here's the original text. Barbara infantilizes him and later threatens him with incarceration. All right, so this is from the same text. They actually notice they have a quote within their quote. This is a source they used, and that Vonnegut wrote himself. And it's probably from the actual book from Slaughterhouse-Five, and they give the page number, right? Since we're using digital sources, typically we don't have page numbers. But if they didn't mention Vonnegut in here, in that quote, then they would have to have Vonnegut 168. Okay, but that's their original text. That's a direct quote. Again, if I put this as is right here into my paper, I have plagiarized. Okay. So here is my my paraphrase text. And so I take this text right here and I paraphrase it. The daughter of the main character, Billy Pilgrim, tells her father that she will lock him up in jail or put him in a mental institution. She believes that she's doing this out of love, but Vonnegut believes that she is doing it to feel a sense of power over her father. Vonnegut felt that it was very exciting for her daughter to remove the power over the most powerful man in her life, her father. Okay, so these are my own words. This is the way I want to say it. It's still the same, but pretty much information. One of the things I could add is another signal phrase saying which article came from, like I did in the previous one, in the quoted one. I could also say, you know, in the, for example, where I say, I could also add in the article spastic in time. So I could use the same signal phrase in front of my paraphrase text as well. Now, but since I did add Barrow, which would, if someone went to my works cited page, they would see the MLA citation for where that starts with the name Barrow, and they would be able to look at that site and know, oh, this is where she got that information from, because it'll have the article name and the publishing date and all of that. And so that's really important. That's why, like, I really want to see this. If you hand in a paper and there are no in-text citations, then you've messed up. And on this paper, I'll send it back and let you fix it. On the next research paper, you should know about it better by then. Okay, summarizing, guidelines for summarizing. We've done this before, but make sure you include main ideas, leave out details. We don't need supporting details. Again, use your own words and indicate the source to avoid plagiarism. And we're doing this when we want to like summarize. It's like an entire work. If I'm summarizing the gist of a movie, I'm giving you the idea of a movie, I'm just going to give you the main points. I'm not going to summarize every detail, but I'm going to give you just, here's the main points, the main parts of an article name. Okay, but look for more details on summarizing in our summary response essay lesson, which we did at the beginning of the semester. So introducing source materials using signal phrases, a couple things. For MLA formatting, which we're using in this class, we use present tense. The author claims, she writes in her novel. He asserts in his claim. You know, she notes that. Okay, this is all present tense. Where on the other hand, APA formatting uses the past tense or present perfect. So the author wrote, the scientist claimed, the character asserted, you know, things like that. So notice we're going into the past tense instead. But there are common signal words on 537. So you'll see words like acknowledges, agrees, argues. This is a really good one to use as we're using our direct quotes to add into our paper. Okay, so as you do your cards, before you take your direct quotes and put them into your paper after doing your research cards, you're going to want to make sure you have your signal phrases. Try to have more than, you don't want to, it shouldn't sound the same every paragraph. You're gonna be very, very boring if you do that. Okay, so that's it for that. Make sure you take the quiz on this video, and 5 questions. Please answer using complete sentences, and you should again make sure you're also listening, so because sometimes the questions are on things I said, not just what's on the screen. All right, thanks a lot.